to heal the soul with real talk and deep dives into hidden mental and emotional valleys and steep peaks of what ails and hinders us from thriving far and beyond surviving. This is a show to awaken the sleeping giants and hidden phenomenal in all of us. R&R. Welcome. You've entered the space to release and rediscover. R&R with Topazz is an experience fueled to heal the soul with real talk and deep dives into hidden mental and emotional valleys and steep peaks of what ails and hinders us from thriving far and beyond surviving. This is a show to awaken the sleeping giants and hidden phenomenal in all of us. R&R. Welcome. Entered the space to release and rediscover. R&R with Topazz is an experience fueled to heal the soul with real talk and deep dives into hidden mental and emotional valleys and steep peaks of what ails and hinders us from thriving far and beyond surviving. This is a show to awaken the sleeping giants and hidden phenomenal in all of us. R&R. Welcome. Well, good evening, and welcome. You are watching R&R with Topazz, Release and Rediscover. That's right, Release and Rediscover is a part of a Black media network, a Black media platform. Tune in to R&R with Topazz every Monday evening at 7 p.m. Please note, however, that I will be on a brief hiatus for the next 2 weeks, as this is our eighth episode for the season. We'll be refreshing some things and we'll be back in 2 weeks. So make sure that you tune in 2 weeks. Tonight, I am excited about the show. We're going to be taking a little bit of a twist this evening with our agenda tonight. We're going to be dealing with something, diving into something that's pretty deep. So this is a trigger warning for those of you that have or are familiar, have heard about what is happening in Tigray, the civil war in Ethiopia. We are going to be taking a look at that to bring awareness. We are release and rediscover. So in releasing and rediscovering, that means diving into those courageous conversations, those courageous topics that most people avoid. It's dealing and addressing, facing and conquering those pink elephants in the room that most people walk around, pretend like aren't there. So that's what we're going to be doing this evening on R&R with Topazz. But before we get into the genocide in Tigray, I just want to address a couple of other issues. Again, you're watching CTN Media, where we are changing the narrative. This is a media platform for the people, by the people, that's right, with issues that are relevant to you. So make sure that you like, subscribe, and share every opportunity that you get. We cover lots of topics. We have various shows and programming on this network. And so there's something for everybody, including a resource platform. The resource report is on at 10 a.m. on Wednesday mornings, where there's lots of information about what's happening in the community. On Tuesdays at 4 p.m., there is 7 Generations Black. And then from time to time, there are other specials. But in the meantime, because R&R and CTN Media is sponsored by the Black Business Initiative, we want to let you know about something big that's coming up. That's right, the annual Black Boss Summit. And for the Black Boss Summit this year, those tickets are on sale. The summit is September 18th September the 10th through the 12th. It is a 3-day summit this year. That's right. It's so exciting. The topic is resilience. So make sure that you get your tickets now. Go to BBI website. Go to bbi.com. Get your tickets. Tell your friends about it. But in the meantime, there is a competition this year that's much like the Shark Tank competition, but it's for us. It's pitch black. And the process for consideration has started. There is a $10,000 prize for the first winner and a $5,000 second prize. That's right. It will be open to Black entrepreneurs with an incredible business idea. So if you've got that business idea, make sure that you submit your application. The deadline is coming up on June the 11th. So we need you to get that application in, get that submission in. Go to www.blackbosssummit.com. That's right. Go to www.blackbosssummit.com, submit that application, tell somebody else to make sure that we get all of those entrepreneurs who have something that will make a difference in our communities. And this is nationwide. This is not just a Denver thing. So if you're in Alaska, if you are in New York City, Arkansas, Los Angeles, Alabama, wherever you may be, get your applications in by June the 11th. That's right. First prize is $10,000, $10,000 grand prize, and second prize $5,000. Again, that's for Pitch Black, the Pitch Black competition coming up. All right. So with that being said, I pray that everyone is well. I just want to acknowledge that these are hard times for sure. And so anyone out there that is grieving the loss of a loved one, condolences to you. Anyone out there that is having a difficult time, you're struggling, you're dealing with challenges that require you to get additional support. Make sure that you tap into Rediscovery Through Wellness at 303-801-8052 for a free 30-minute phone consult for any of your therapeutic needs. Rediscovery Through Wellness is here for you. For grief and loss, for couples, for individual, depression, anxiety, or just dealing with unexpected life changes. And maybe you just need support or coaching to work through this so that you can operate in your best Black self. That's right, in your best, beautiful, brilliant, bold, Blacknificent self. Text 303-801-8052 for that support. All right. Well, our guest has arrived this evening. I'm excited to introduce her to you. We have an amazing woman from right here in Denver, Colorado, our very own advocate who has been fighting this battle for what's going on in Tigray. She has brought awareness. She's bringing awareness. She's bringing the message to community worldwide. That's right. And so I'm thrilled that she accepted the invite to be with us this evening. So I am going to go ahead and bring her on board, and please excuse some of the technical difficulties that I'm having at the moment, but we're going to get through this. All right, we are going to get through this. It's the enemy not wanting this agenda to come forth, but we coming regardless. We're coming. We're bringing truth. We're bringing awareness to what is happening to our brothers and sisters, but mostly the emphasis tonight is going to be what's happening to our sisters, the Black women and children in Ethiopia. So without further ado, I want to bring forth Millete. Welcome this evening. Millete, thank you for being with us. I'm so excited to have you on the show tonight. Most of you know her as the owner of Whittier Cafe, but what you don't know is that there are so many facets to this incredible woman. Owning Whittier Cafe and bringing what she brings to the culture through her cafe over in Whittier is just a small bit of what she contributes to community, what she contributes to humanity nationwide. So for those of you that are viewing, go ahead, give her a round of applause. That's right. Snap, snap, give it up for Millete. Hey sis, how you doing?
I'm good, Sister Topazz. Thank you so much. I was trying to get it shared on Facebook. That's why I was fumbling a little bit, but I think I got it. So
okay, good. Yeah, let's like, subscribe, and share. All of you viewers out there, make sure that you share. If I can get my laptop to come up, then I can share from my phone. But in the meantime, thank you and welcome. Thank you for being a part of the show this evening. And so I do not want to butcher your last name. I think I have it, but just to be certain, I'm going to ask you to let our viewing audience know what your last name is. And again, this is a Mind Matters show. That's right, Monday Mind Matters. And so we deal with everything that affects the mind, that affects our heart, our emotional state. And we have recently been tapping into what affects the body. And so tonight's show is going to tap into all of the above, as well as what's happening with the spirit, in the spirit realm, to us spiritually, to our sisters over in Tigray, Ethiopia. All right. So please, if you wouldn't mind just sharing a little bit more about yourself tonight, because you're in real estate, you're a realtor, you just are multifaceted, you're a mother, you're a wife, you've got these little babies that you are mothering and parenting and doing a pretty darn good job at it too. So yeah, this is what phenomenal is all about. This is that phenomenal woman right here. She is a true example of that Proverbs 31 woman from the standpoint of handling her business. All right, Miss Millete, let them know some things about yourself.
That is a big introduction. Thank you, sister. Thank you. My name is Millete Birhanemaskel. I am originally from Tigray, the northernmost part of Ethiopia. You probably can hear my kids now in the background as well. Let me just tell him, I'm gonna tell my husband real quick to gather the babies. Okay. So I have 3 children, as you probably just heard them. My oldest is 13 and my youngest is 3. She's going to be 4 soon. I live in Denver. And like you said, I do a number of things. I own the Whittier Cafe. It's a social justice cafe in Denver, in the Whittier neighborhood, a historically Black neighborhood where there was redlining and a number of other issues. And now, of course, there's gentrification and so many problems there. But we are the only African espresso bar and social justice cafe in the city. That's been a really powerful part of my story, and how I I've always been involved in activism in different ways, whether we called it that or not, but community work or whatever you want to call it. And the cafe was just like an outgrowth of that. But the big thing that I really want to talk about today is how my whole life just got turned on its head about 7 months ago because of what happened in Tigray. So I was born in a refugee camp in Sudan. And I was born in a refugee camp in Sudan because the Ethiopian government was at that time bombing the people of Tigray. And that's where my family was from. So my mom and dad separately, they didn't know each other, both fled the country, fled Tigray, fled Ethiopia, and ended up in Sudan. And that's where they met and had me and my brother. So I'm giving you that background because now, fast forward 4 decades later, the same thing is happening. The government of Ethiopia is again bombing its own people, starving its own people. There's a man-made famine. And there's so much more in terms of what's happening, but the bottom line is the government is once again attacking its own people. And it's resulted in a really devastating genocide. And I really never understood, I think my parents, they ran away from it to Sudan. Then they ended up having an opportunity to come to America. So they wanted to move forward. So they didn't do a lot of educating on the history of Ethiopia in terms of how this has happened time and time again in Tigray, a man-made famine, bombing your own people, just trying to exterminate the people of Tigray. And there are different reasons that people have for doing this, but here we are again, 2021, and we're dealing with the same problem.
Wow, just hearing that is overwhelming. I can't imagine living in it and living through it. When we spoke earlier, you mentioned that for your grandparents, I believe, this is their 3rd round in being in some form of a genocide, an intentional genocide against their people.
It is.
So, when I think about that, I'm like, oh my gosh, how in the world do you survive that and maintain your sanity, maintain your commitment to humanity?
It's difficult. So yeah, you're right. My grandmother, this is the 3rd time that she's experienced war from her own government. And so, I met my grandmother for the first time when I was 17 years old. It was the first time that I went back to Ethiopia. And one of the things that I remember about her is she was really afraid of loud noises. And I didn't understand why. I never really thought too much about it. I just figured she's just scared of loud noises. And it wasn't until recently talking to my mom, who lives with me here in Denver, she lives near me, talking to her about my grandmother, and we were wondering, are they okay? Because there was and still is in most parts of Tigray, a communication blackout. So whenever there's a blackout, something really terrible happens, a massacre or just something horrible. And, the people aren't able to tell their stories, and we hear about it later. So my mom and I were talking about my grandmother, her mother, and about how, how is she doing? Where is she at? Or is she hungry? Do they have food? Are they safe? There's mass rape, gang rape that's happening. And the oldest victim is 89 years old. So my grandmother is not safe from being a target. And so we're talking about this, and my mom brought up, I hope she doesn't, I hope she's not like shocked to death. And I was like, what do you mean by that? And she said, afraid of those really loud noises because she's lived through airstrikes multiple times. And so whenever she hears a loud noise, she immediately will holler, and scare herself. And so, I was thinking about that, and I thought, wow, that's that trauma you never outlive, especially if you don't ever deal with it. So yeah, for her, it's the third siege on Tigray since she's been alive. And so I can't imagine, living in a situation where every few decades you're fighting for your existence again.
My gosh. I want to I want to backstep just a little bit over a couple of things that you mentioned, because that was a lot. So the first thing, just for the purposes of clarity for our viewers, when you say a communication blackout, can you talk about what that means? And before you respond to that, let me see what this comment says. So to be clear, and forgive my ignorance, but you are saying that it is Ethiopians killing Ethiopians, not like an outside entity coming in and killing them, but literally like Black on Black genocide.
Thank you for that question, because this is the problem. This is the problem. So yes, it is literally the Ethiopian government that started a war with its own people. But get this, the Ethiopian government is not only attacking its own people, the Ethiopian government has invited in Eritrea, which is a country to the north of Tigray and has historical grievances with the people of Tigray, invited those soldiers in and their leader in. And the Eritreans are being blamed for most of the atrocities. There are Ethiopian soldiers as well who are taking part, especially in the rape. But a lot of the looting and the burning of farmlands and all of that is by Ethiopians. And it's, if nothing else, it's state sanctioned. They've allowed the Eritreans to come in. They're working side by side. And don't take my word for it. This is what the US government is saying. The US government is saying that the Ethiopian soldiers and Eritrean soldiers are working together in Tigray. So imagine that. Imagine, this is the example that we constantly use. Imagine the US federal government having an issue with New York and inviting Canada in to bomb New York. I mean, it's absurd. It's completely it would never happen, right? Because the government's main responsibility is what? To protect its people, not invite a foreign country in to come and kill and rape and pillage and loot and burn farmlands and just wreak havoc on people. And so, yes, thank you for that question, because it very much is the Ethiopian government that is leading this effort in Tigray.
And that is so critical. I mean, it may seem like just an obvious clarification for some people, but I know that a lot of people think of Ethiopia as just one country, when in reality, there are other entities inside of Ethiopia that operate within their own governments. Can you talk about that a little bit, so that might help people to understand this divisiveness?
Absolutely, absolutely. So the challenge in Ethiopia is it's a nation of nations. You have 80 some ethnic groups and languages throughout the country that are all sharing the same borders. And so you hear the story about, oh, Ethiopia has never been colonized. In fact, they beat back the Italian colonizers not once, but twice. All these heroic stories about what Ethiopia is. But the reality is Ethiopia was an empire. And it was an empire that expanded and contracted, and it colonized local indigenous African groups, some very, very violently, and brought everyone into the same borders. And now you're supposed to be one people. The problem is there's no Ethiopian identity, unless you shed your identity, right? There's all of these different ethnic groups. And the problem that we've had in Ethiopia is you'll hear this story about tribalism. Someone will inevitably, someone's going to make a comment here and say, she's a tribalist, she, whatever. No, that's not what we're saying. It's no different than, think about Native Americans here. When people think about Native Americans, they try to block them into one group, like as if there's one Native American, but it's not true. There's so many different nations, right? And collectively you may call them Native Americans, but they're very different. No, it's not the same case in Ethiopia. It becomes a problem when you start to think your ethnicity or your tribal group is superior to another group. That's an issue, but that's not what we're talking about. What's happening right now is you have these nationalists, predominantly Amhara nationalists, who, they want you to speak one language, and that's Amharic. That's the national language of Ethiopia now, but it's always been like de facto national language, even before it was, in law. Like for the Oromos, they weren't even allowed to speak their own language until after 1991. So you have an issue with Tigrayans who are very, very proud and want to keep their culture. They're not willing to shed their identity to just be Ethiopians. And this has always posed a problem for the idea of a nationalist Ethiopian identity. And so that's one of the reasons. And I had to learn all of this over time, because I'll be honest with you, sister, I always said I was an Ethiopian. I never said, oh, I'm a Tigrayan, I'm from Northern. I never did that. I identified as an Ethiopian. I didn't know what that meant exactly until recently. A lot of Tigrayans have been doing some soul searching in terms of, okay, how do we fit into this fabric of Ethiopia? And how does Ethiopia accept us? You know, in their story. And there are a lot of different ethnic groups who could say as much or even worse in terms of how they've been treated in the history of Ethiopia. But I'll tell you, there are a lot of Tigrayans right now who are reevaluating that. I mean, I have a necklace on right now that is the outline of Tigray, the region in the north that's currently being attacked. I've always had Ethiopian things, Ethiopian rings and Ethiopian necklaces and Ethiopian, you know, I didn't know any better. I didn't know that there was an effort of erasure. I didn't know that we were a minority ethnic group, because every 30 years, 1.5 million Ethiopians or Tigrayans are starved to death. I mean, these are like real things that have happened in history. Sister, I didn't know that my great-grandmother, my mother's grandmother, died in 1985 in the famine in Ethiopia. The famine in Tigray. We say Ethiopia, that's how it's always told, but it was in Tigray, predominantly in Tigray, and also another region called Wola. But my grandmother starved to death. I had no idea. I just learned this recently, and my mom is really obsessed with feeding people and taking care of people. And you know, I have friends, and she gets really upset with me if we eat lunch late or dinner late or skip a meal, and I never really understood, like, Mom, why are you so obsessed with food? Like, that was her thing. I didn't know that was informed by trauma of losing her grandmother in 85. This is recent history. This isn't like 100 years ago.
Right.
You know, and we've given the Ethiopian government a pass so many times, and it's just, you know, enough now. We have to call it out. And if Ethiopia is going to stay together, these issues have to be called out, and there has to be some reconciliation and admittance that it actually happened.
You know, I want to just pause for a moment and acknowledge the pain and the and how overwhelming it is for people hearing for the first time that this is Ethiopians against Ethiopians, two different countries within Ethiopia. Or would you consider them two different countries or two different tribes?
Two different tribal groups, really.
Okay. Tribal groups within the country of Ethiopia, and how painful that is, because I think the first thing that we think when we hear genocide is that it really is Europeans, colonists who are actually instigating the genocide that's taking place. But when we find out that it's Black against Black, there's a whole nother layer of trauma and pain that goes with that. However, I want to look at some of the origin of the divisiveness and where it came from, because I'm thinking that part of that really stemmed from whatever influence colonists may have had in some of the initial divisiveness and the messages and the propaganda. We know that a lot of it comes from the power-hungry leaders over there who are desperate for maintaining their power. But where did that really originate?
It's such a good question. That's such a good question. First of all, it's the idea of supremacy. And it's really challenging to understand, for some, to understand what's happening in Ethiopia, because our context of supremacy is white supremacy. That's usually how we think of it. We don't think of it in terms of cultural supremacy. So when you have a Black nation that also has this issue of supremacy, it's a problem. So yeah, there is definitely a colonial influence to everything. I mean, we had, you can even look this up, but there are all these videos that are now surfacing as people do more and more research. But King Haile Selassie, who was very evil, by the way, people don't recognize how awful he was. So awful. When there was a famine, again, a man-made famine in Tigray while he was king, he purposely refused to send aid into Tigray. He let it spoil, and rot in the capital city because he wanted to control Tigrayans. He also invited the British in to bomb Tigray. I mean, these are things that we didn't even know, that happened in history. And so King Haile Selassie actually never considered himself Black. And
Wow.
I'm telling you, and this is like, there are all these videos of people who represented him, who came to the US, and they would sit on these panels and have conversations. They would have West Africans, they would have South Africans, and there was and always an Ethiopian. And I've seen at least 4 or 5 of these videos now. And they would ask them, they were being interviewed by white hosts here in America. And they would ask them questions. And I kid you not, they would say things like, we're not Black. We don't care about what's happening in South Africa. It's not a problem. We can't relate to apartheid and all these things that are happening. I mean, they would literally say that. And so I'll never forget, there's a video, and we could post it in the comments later, or somebody who's watching can post it. But there was a brother from West Africa, I'm not sure exactly where, who said, okay, if you're not Black, who are you? Where are you from? And he said, well, I told you that we are from the lost tribes of Israel. So the brother from West Africa said, well, you're definitely lost. I don't know exactly where. You're lost for sure. And I remember thinking, thank you. And so this is the mentality of, we're not Black. We're better than Black. And you are Black. You know what I mean? Like that kind of thing.
Right.
And so the idea of a supremacy or a hierarchy is very real. Slavery wasn't even outlawed until the 1940s in Ethiopia. And the darker you were, that's what determined if you were a slave, if you were considered a slave. And there are words and terms for it that still live till today to describe dark-skinned people in Ethiopia. So there's definitely an element of like colonialism and the lighter, the better, colorism, and that kind of thing that exists. But for us, it's challenging because it's Black folks, and we're talking about cultural supremacy as opposed to, white and Black. So it's a little harder to identify, but it's really not. It's the same thing if you like really break it down in terms of someone who thinks they're better than someone for, just completely on made up assumptions.
Sure.
The other thing I want to say, the other really big issue is in this era of Black Lives Matter, you have Ethiopian officials who are telling Europeans or Americans or Westerners in general to stay out of it. They say things like African solutions for African problems, and so they're using that whole colonial argument of like, don't you come over here, white man, and tell me how to rule my people. Don't you come over here and try and tell us that we can't commit genocide on our own people. It's wild. It's wild the way that they're trying to use things like Black Lives Matter, which is about saving Black lives, not justifying taking Black lives. And so it's just, that's what we're living in. It's this very bizarre world in Ethiopia where truth is fiction and, it's just upside down.
Well, so my gosh, there's so much in every interval that you speak to. So I want to back up again. If you could speak to the blackout on communication, let's start there. Let people know, what does that mean exactly?
Thank you. That's a good point, because I've been living this for 7 months. And so I sometimes don't go into the detail I should. So basically on election night in the United States, we're all watching the elections, right? And we're like, is Trump going to win? Oh my God, he can't win, whatever your belief was. And so there was a sense of relief because we thought, oh, thank God, Biden is going to win. At least there was in my house. And one of my friends came over and she was in tears. And I'm like, what's wrong with you? Trump's not going to win, whatever. And she's like, no, they've bombed Tigray. And I'm like, what do you mean they've bombed Tigray? And so on election night in the US, the Ethiopian government bombed Tigray. And when they did that, they turned off all of the phones. They turned off all of the internet. It was a complete blackout. There was no running water in the region. Children were literally drinking water from rivers and dying of diarrhea, because you're drinking dirty water.
Sure.
So we literally could not reach our families at all. So we had no idea who was alive, who was dead, where did they bomb, what's going. I mean, we literally had no communication, no information. And that was for, gosh, they started intermittently turning things on. There's still no internet. There's controlled settings where there's internet, but for the most part, people still don't have it, because when they would turn on the internet or the phones, our families were uploading video of what soldiers were doing in terms of like executing boys and throwing them over cliffs.
My gosh. So let me pause you. Let me pause you for just a moment, because I really need our viewers to grasp this. I need you, those of you out there that are watching, and again, I'm going to encourage you to like, subscribe, and share. Let's get this message out. But I need you to really grasp what she just said. If you were in a situation right now, effective in the next 15 minutes, everything got shut down, that you had no control over your phone. You know how you feel when you lose your phone, okay? You know how you feel if maybe you forgot to pay your bill and they shut off your phone. Okay, well, you paid your bill, you didn't lose your phone, it's in your hand, but it's been shut off by the government, and there is absolutely nothing you can do about it. So there's that. Now your internet is shut off. The power is shut off for you to communicate outside of whom you can have direct physical contact with. If it's somebody who is too far away, you're not going to be able to communicate. And in the meantime, not only that, but in the midst of you being in this blackout, they are torturing, murdering, and taking over the city. Just imagine that happening right here in the state of Colorado, where the government, there's an entity that has locked out the borders. No one can leave, no one can come into Colorado. You are locked in. It doesn't matter what mode of transportation you have. It doesn't matter what class you are locked in, and you cannot communicate with anyone outside of Colorado. So let's just deal with just that little piece right there and the trauma of that alone. And you're coming out, you're hearing all these bombings. You heard her talk about her grandmother and the trauma, the PTSD, because basically that's what you're describing is post-traumatic stress disorder, where she is dealing with the noise and how noise affects her. And then the stress of anticipating this could happen again at any point in time. And then it does, even though you've gone maybe 10 years and there's not been any indication that it's happening. You're just going and life seems okay. And it's like, you can breathe, you can exhale. And then all of a sudden, starts all over again.
Yep.
I need you all to just get with us, just with that part right there, because where we're going next is even deeper. If you can just even fathom that. She talked about boys being dropped off of cliffs and thrown over cliffs, and those are some of the videos that I saw with the torture to the young boys. But where we want to put the emphasis for the last half of this show, we want to talk about what is happening to the Black women, to the young girls, to the children, and the elderly women, not just the young girls. Not just the pretty girls, not just the girls who fit a certain stereotype with regard to their body type or any of that, the length of their hair. No, all the women, regardless of their age, elderly women, babies. Let's talk about what's happening to them, because we've been in this mode of protect Black women. And when we say protect Black women, we want to protect Black women everywhere, because they are at risk everywhere. We are at risk everywhere, not just right here in the United States. And so again, I want to remind you that you are watching R&R with Topazz, Release and Rediscover. This is a special show being dedicated to the genocide that's taking place not 10 years ago, not 30 years ago, not 5 years ago, but right now in 2021, this is happening in Tigray. And this show has been dedicated to addressing that topic, to bring awareness bring awareness. That's why we need you to share. We need you to share. We need you to get the word out. We need to bring awareness. People need to know, because I remember we didn't find out what was happening with even, I think about Rwanda. I think about apartheid. I think about how long it took before the real truth of the just the inhumanity, just the ugliness of what was taking place had been going on for years before it really got to the United States and the core of the people to have the realization of this was taking place right now. So would you please speak to what's going on with our sisters?
I will, and thank you for that. And that's probably the most tragic part of what's happening, because there's a lot that's happening right now that would just, keep you up at night. I'll tell you, as a Tigrayan and interacting with so many Tigrayans over the last 7 months, it's not just me, but we have not slept. We have not slept in 7 months. Think about being in opposite time zones. So we're constantly checking our phones to see if there's any update in the night, home, what happened now? Is the phone working now? So I spoke with the whistleblower in Darfur, the man who literally called Darfur a genocide, Dr. Mukesh Kapila. And because I've been consumed with this for the last 7 months, obviously, because my entire family is there outside of my mother and my children, And so I spoke with him, and he said, and he's very vocal and very loud about what's happening in Tigray. And he said, what's happening in Tigray is exponentially worse than what happened in Darfur. The closest he can relate it to is what happened in Rwanda, but he thinks it's worse based on the stories that he's heard. And so what's happening to women and girls, the level of rape that's happening. Sister, the youngest rape victim is 4 years old. The youngest rape victim on record. 4. Who rapes a baby? I mean, the oldest is 89 years old, and that's just in one hospital. That's a figure from one hospital. And so you have Eritrean soldiers who've got to be the nastiest people on earth, because the atrocities that they're committing, I mean, it's not undisciplined soldiers, which happens in war, right? Rape happens in war by undisciplined soldiers. That doesn't necessarily make it a genocide. What these people are doing is I'll give you an example. In one hospital, they're tying women to beds in rooms and gang raping them until they're like bleeding profusely. And then when they're at that point, they just toss them on the side of the road. And there are priests and nuns who collect these women and try and put them on buses to get them to the capital city, the only place they can get treatment, because every other hospital in the whole region of Tigray has been looted. So they can't get treatment. So they have to go to the capital city. And this isn't like a one-off or two-off situation. It's the story that's coming up again and again and again and again. They're inserting metal rods into women's vaginas and burning their reproductive organs. And they say things like, there was one woman who said, "Why are you doing this to me?" She asked an Eritrean soldier. She said, we speak the same language. Why? You're my brother. Why are you doing this to me? And he said, "You're not my problem. It's your womb. That's my problem."
And that's what makes a genocide.
That's what makes a genocide. They say things like, "We're cleansing your bloodline." And they're purposely impregnating women. There's a woman, I spoke with the CEO of Eider Hospital, which is the only operating hospital in Tigray, in Mekelle. And he gave a story about a woman who's HIV positive. And she told the soldier, "I am HIV positive. You don't rape me." And he said, "Good, because it will help us spread HIV as we rape other women." Think about how demented you are to rape a woman who has HIV. You yourself are going to die, and it's worth it for you because you get to infect other people because you have plans to continue to rape. This is what's happening in Tigray. Not one or two stories. CNN, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, The Guardian news. I mean, just Google it. There are all these stories now. It's not even a question anymore. It's not even a question anymore. This war is being played out on the bodies of Black women and girls in Tigray.
My God. And when I think about a 4-year-old baby, a helpless 4-year-old child, it's bad enough that she would be raped in the first place. But what's happening to these victims is they are being raped over and over again. They're being gang raped. They're being raped by multiple offenders, because they are not seen as human. And so let's talk about that for a minute. Let's talk about the conditioning, the psychological conditioning that went on intentionally by the leader, who the person who's influencing and directing this army of terrorists. Let's talk about the intentional psychological conditioning that he did to set these terrorists up to be able to do what they did, or what they're doing.
And that goes to Linda's question, because I see her asking all these questions about the government. And here's what happened. So the Ethiopian government, a prime minister there were all these protests in the capital city, led by Oromo youth predominantly. They were unhappy for a number of reasons. And as a result of their protests, the country was able to bring in Abiy Ahmed. He was appointed prime minister. He is supposedly of Oromo background. I don't know if he is or not, but they say he's of Oromo background. He was supposed to come in and be a sort of a caretaker to get the country to an election. By the way, that election has been postponed, I think 5 or 6 times now. It hasn't happened. Supposedly it's going to happen later this month. We'll see. I don't know how a country at war has an election, but anyway, so he was supposed to be caretaker, but instead what he did, he was finding success in sort of villainizing the Tigrayan leaders who had been in charge of the country before him. And so he would say things like these daytime hyenas, or use like really dehumanizing language to describe Tigrayan people. He would say like these Tigrayan leadership, it's like a baby that bites its mother's breast. So he would say things that would, like small things that would dehumanize. If there was something happening in one part of the country, like some fighting or something, he would always blame it on the Tigrayans, the Tigrayan leaders. And so what that did was create an appetite to hate Tigrayans. And by the way, there's been conditioning for much longer than just the last 2 years about who are Tigrayans and, you know, they're your enemies, that kind of thing. I didn't even know. There's a really well-known journalist who came out and said, I was raised to hate Tigrayans. I don't know why. I just thought they were all bad. You know, he's a journalist right now and he's covering this genocide. It's wild. But so there's always been that sort of back cultural context also happening. But what Abiy Ahmed did was make it so that you could publicly criticize Tigrayans now, and you could hate Tigrayans, and it just grew. It just grew little by little, and anything good in the country was because of Ethiopians, and anything bad was because of Tigrayans. And so that continued until you got to a point now where now if you rape a Tigrayan woman or you kill a Tigrayan child, you've already dehumanized them. It's easy to kill something that you don't think is human, right?
Right.
You deserve it. And so there were a couple of things that happened. Abiy Ahmed kept postponing the elections, and the government of Tigray held an election, a regional election, which is within the constitution. The regions could hold elections. There's nothing that stopped them. What he stopped was the national election, which determines who the prime minister is and the parliament, how many seats each place gets, that kind of thing. And so Abiy Ahmed was upset that Tigray held an election when he's been postponing it, saying coronavirus was the issue, which it wasn't. At that time, there were less than 100 cases. It was like 0.001% of the population or something. Now there is a real coronavirus issue, and they're still going to do an election. But so that was one thing. The second thing was, over the past 2 years, Abiy Ahmed has been, basically there have been a series of high profile assassinations, predominantly Tigrayans, but also leaders of different places. It happened in Somali, it happened in the Amhara region, and it happened with a Tigrayan general who was assassinated with no one brought to justice. And so he was sort of creating that storyline, right, of like the Tigrayans who are a problem. And so what he tried to do was topple the regional government in Tigray. Well, they found out and they responded. And so the way he sold the story was the Tigrayan leadership attacked the federal base. that was located in Tigray. And so it was an attack on the nation. And so we have to respond. And so those are kind of the reasonings that were given to start the war. But here's the thing, even if all of that is true, rape,
Right.
why the assassination of children? Why the burning of farmlands? Why loot everyone's home? Why rape children? Why rape elderly people? Why did you ethnically cleanse the entire western part of Tigray? 1.7 million Tigrayans are missing. They're gone off of those lands. Where did they go? Did you kill them? Only 60,000 made it to Sudan because they then put soldiers on the border to block them from crossing into safety, which is also illegal in international law. You can't block refugees from fleeing. And so he created these conditions to say, well, the Tigrayans started it. They started it. They attacked our federal base. Okay, even if they did, let's give it to them. Even if they did. How are you doing what you're doing right now? Why are you starving people? 5.2 million Tigrayans are at risk for starvation, which is a fancy way of saying 5.2 million people are gonna die because they don't have food. You know, and these are our families. And that's why for 7 months, we have been advocating nonstop. There have been, I'm not exaggerating when I say dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of protests worldwide, you know, where we've come out just hollering and screaming and saying, please, you have to help our families.
My gosh, my gosh. So you have this government that has intentionally set it up to drive hate towards this particular group of people, which are the Tigrayans. Is that correct? Am I saying that right? Tigrayans. Tigrayans. Which reminds me of what happened during the genocide here in America. What for generations, what was put into the minds of white people about Black folk.
Right.
Because when you would ask them how they could hate us so much, why they saw us as animals, as less than human, that they had no rational answer. I don't know why I hate them. I just do. I don't know why I think they're stupid or dumb or incapable or less than. I just do. That's what I thought of when I heard you describing the conditioning, the psychological conditioning of dehumanizing and demoralizing, depersonalizing this whole group of people that are connected, that are related. That is such warfare. So, and then speaking of warfare, I want to talk about what's happening spiritual. What are some of the spiritual and religious pieces to this genocide, to this civil war that are worth mentioning? How relevant it is when you think about what's going on here. It's bigger than what seems obvious because there's a lot of subliminal activity that's going on as well that is also very intentional.
Yes, thank you for saying that. And I just want to add that when you relate this to the African-American experience here, no one understands being terrorized by their own government more than Black folks in America. And that it's the same. The Ethiopian government has terrorized Tigrayans generation after generation after generation. And then you start to think things get better and you get complacent and then it happens again, you know? And so thank you for making that comparison. So from a spiritual perspective, first of all, I don't know if people know, but Tigray is a very, very, very rich religious and spiritual place. So you hear a lot about Ethiopia, and a lot of that history is actually in Tigray. So for example, the Ark of the Covenant, which holds the 10 Commandments, is in Tigray, in a church called St. Mary's Church in Aksum. The first mosque in Africa is in just outside of Mekelle, I believe it's in Wukro, in Tigray. Both of those places, by the way, have been attacked in this war. The mosque was bombed, and St. Mary's Church was the site of a gruesome massacre, the Aksum massacre, where hundreds and hundreds, but easily probably thousands of people were killed. Nobody knows because there's no access to the region still. There are reporters who have gone in and asked questions, but they're not given full access. They're being watched by the government. They're controlled in terms of where they can go, but easily, they're saying 800-900 people, but I bet you it's more were killed in that church. Religious artifacts are being stolen. The oldest, I kid you not, literally the oldest scripture books in the world are in Tigray. Those have been looted, at least as far as our understanding. Those sites have been attacked. I don't know if the people were able to protect them and move things, but this really is spiritual warfare. It really is. And you think about Tigrayans and you think about the women and how they're being forced to make these impossible decisions around abortion. And I'm telling you that when I tell you this is a spiritual and religious place, to even say abortion out loud, I'm not going to say it never happened, but to say it out loud was so taboo. And now you have a whole culture that's scrambling to help women who want to have an abortion, get an abortion. You talk about a generation shift by force. I mean, sister, I watched a story yesterday of a young woman. I don't know her exact age, but she's under 20, probably between 15 and 20, who is pregnant, did not want to have the baby, could not access an abortion. And so she killed the baby. And I don't know how she did it or what she did, but the baby's still inside of her. And so she was on video, and it was a European news agency that was interviewing her. And she said, I can't have this child. And so I killed it, and it's inside of me now. And I just, I was watching her speak and listening because she's speaking in Tigrinya and they have subtitles. And I thought, oh my God, I can't believe she had to make this impossible decision, And I think about the women who are going to have these babies because they have no choice, because they can't do what she did, or they don't want to do what she did, but they don't want the baby. And so, I think about their situation, and I think about the babies that will be born and who's going to love those babies, who remind them of this painful history, and who will be blamed for what happened. And they're just innocent souls. I mean, there are so many ways that the soul and the spirit is being attacked in Tigray. And, who's speaking up? We talk about Black women, uplift Black women, protect Black women. No, nobody's doing that. Nobody is doing that. They try and tell their stories and they get threatened. And by the way, this administration, this appointed administration, never been elected, is at least 40 to 50% women at the head. The president is a woman, and it's under her watch. And the only thing I'll give her credit for is that they kept denying the rape. They kept denying it. They kept denying it no matter how much evidence came out. She finally went to Tigray and she couldn't deny it. She had to admit that it was happening. She downplayed it. She made it seem like it wasn't as bad as we were hearing, but she at least admitted it, to say there are some cases, even though there are a lot of cases. But even with women at the top, there's still a denial. There's still no effort to protect women and children.
So what do you think that's about? What do you think that's about? That there is so much denial, even within the very tribe that's being taken out, that's being killed at every level. What do you think that denial is about?
Well, there's no denial within Tigray, but outside of Tigray, I guess, and I can't understand it because I don't think you can understand evil all the time. We try, but you just can't. But I know that within genocide, one of the key elements is denial. And I'm sure it has to be, because if you admit what's happening, it's so cruel. It's so cruel and it's so evil, that how can you admit that it's happening and still participate in it? But if you deny it and you act like it's not happening, which in the US, here's the thing. Within Ethiopia, there are communication blackouts. They control what information the larger masses get. So, okay, I'll give it to people in Ethiopia that they don't really know how bad it is in Tigray, maybe, although they could Google too and see. I mean, the blackout is in Tigray, not outside of Tigray. But let's just say the information is being controlled for them. People in the States who are non-Tigrayans say that we're lying. I have friends here who I organize with on Black Lives Matter issues, on campaigns for different progressive candidates. People here, other Ethiopians, who tell me, you're a liar. That's not happening. No one is dying. There's no genocide. There's no rape. I'm like, I personally have lost 7 family members. That's just me. I'm one person. And I still haven't reached anyone in the country. These are people who live closer to the city.
And let me just clarify for our viewers, this is 7 family members in 7 months. This is not 7 family members just over the years, but in 7 months. That's important. And I'm glad you clarified that the denial is not within Tigray, because I misunderstood that. I thought you were saying that these women in leadership were in leadership in Tigray, but these are women in leadership in Ethiopia.
Correct.
Who are in denial.
Correct. In fact, the president is so callous that there's only one safe house in Tigray, only one in Mekelle. And she took federal soldiers with her to the safe house and therefore exposed the safe house. They're not supposed to know. Apparently, when she came to the safe house, the women started screaming because it was men in uniform who raped them. It was men in uniform who did this to them. And so when she came with soldiers to the safe house because she needed protection, she exposed them. And since then, there have been multiple raids on the safe house. So it's a lot. It's a lot to absorb. The nonprofit, the agencies, the foreign aid agencies that are in Tigray are saying things like they need more emergency kits for contraception, emergency contraception kits. They need more antiviral drugs so that the women, to try and protect women from getting HIV after they've been raped. I mean, that alone is the evidence. But you have feminists in like the capital city of Ethiopia who are saying, where's the evidence that these women are being raped? As if women lie about this. In fact, women underreport it. They understand what's happened to them.
So I want to pause for just a moment. I want to give attention before we are completely out of time here. I want to give attention to some questions from the chat. Shay, if you wouldn't mind just sharing some of those questions so that we can give Millete an opportunity to respond. We have one that says it's heartbreaking. Definitely it is. How do we help? What can we do?
That's a good question. So right now, there are websites you can go to that will give you direct action items. I'm going to tell you a few of them. One is Tigray Action Committee. I think it's .com. TigrayActionCommittee.com. Another one is omnatigray.org. Omna, O-M-N-A, Tigray, Tigray.org. You go to these sites and they have things like petitions you can sign and share. They tell you how to connect with your legislators to ask them to take action. And here's the problem. The US has done a lot. A lot has happened in a short amount of time in terms of, if you think about it, Trump was in office when this first started and Trump doesn't care. Trump hates. He called Africa shithole countries. You know what I mean? So he wasn't going to do anything. However, once Biden came into office, we started seeing things move slowly. For us, it was slow anyway. I actually think 7 months is pretty damn heroic to put Tigray on the map and get people to respond. But it's not fast enough based on what's happening to the people, especially when, they're at stage 4 famine right now, which means like one step away from like death. So you go to those sites, you'll find lots of action items in terms of how you can help. The big thing right now is we're asking for an arms embargo on Ethiopia so that people cannot sell arms to Ethiopia anymore. That's the big thing. We're asking for a no-fly zone because there are reports that the Ethiopian government is using chemical weapons. There have been a few stories reported of women who were, there was one woman in particular where there was actually video of her screaming because of a white phosphorus attack, that literally her skin is like peeling off of her body. And so we saw a video of that. And there's reports that apparently this is going to happen again, but on a massive scale in Tigray. So we're asking for no-fly zone, no drones, no nothing to try and protect people. And the only way this is going to happen is if the US leads it. That's the only way. So we need help. We need to keep amplifying this. The more people that know, the more that our legislators know you care, then the more likely we are to get action. So please, you have to just keep sharing the stories. You have to contact your legislators. You have to sign the petitions. We need this action. We need peacekeepers on the ground to protect people. Apparently, there Senator Patrick Leahy from Vermont just a couple days ago called it a genocide, and he's the first one to publicly call it a genocide. Up until now, everyone has been saying, is it a genocide? What makes it a genocide? There are genocidal acts that are happening, but is it a full genocide? These crazy theoretical questions, because I guess in history, these kinds of things have not been called genocides until after the genocide is complete. So to call it a genocide while it's in motion is a pretty big deal. And so this has happened now from the senator from Vermont. And so that pushes things in motion in a way that we hope will help stop what's happening and put peacekeepers on the ground to protect people. Someone put a good question up about Tiffany Haddish. Oh man, that's a hard one. So Tiffany Haddish is, her father's Eritrean, her mother's African-American. She was born here. She never really knew her father until he was on his deathbed, and she took him back to Eritrea to bury him. Well, in the process of that, I don't think there are a lot of celebrities that come out of Eritrea, so it was a big deal when she went to Eritrea to bury her father. And so the president of Eritrea, who by the way is a tyrant, Eritrea is known as the North Korea of Africa. He wined and dined her and made it a big deal and showed her the beautiful parts of the country, but didn't really give her the truth about Eritrea and the condition of Eritrean people. There's a big opposition movement to try and get rid of this tyrant to free the people of Eritrea. They're in terrible conditions. There's actually a movie called Escaping Eritrea that came out on PBS that can tell you more about that if you're interested in the details of what's happening in Eritrea. But things are happening, people are being jailed and kept in shipping containers and underground shipping containers in the heat of Eritrea. And so they die of heat in those shipping containers. I mean, you've got to watch the documentary Escaping Eritrea. So Tiffany Haddish goes back, and in her desire to reconnect with her roots and belong and whatever, she finds this beautiful welcoming from this dictator, from this tyrant. And so she comes back to the States, and she's sharing this story of beautiful Eritrea and this beautiful country and this wonderful leader that couldn't be more than a lie. I mean, it's the complete opposite. And so now she's denying what's happening in Tigray, because to her, I think she sees it as an attack on her identity, of what she just connected to. And so it's really a shame, because there are powerful Eritrean opposition movements that are still very patriotic Eritreans who can still call out the government and the crimes of that government and call a genocide, and it doesn't make you any less of an Eritrean.
Right.
And her desire to belong, she's really gaslighting and telling this really false story. She goes on Clubhouse, that I'm not really in Clubhouse that much, but she goes into this Clubhouse groups and she says things like, well, where are the bodies? Show me the bodies. I see Eritrean bodies, but I don't see Tigrayan bodies, and they're the ones who came in and did this to her. I mean, just really ignorant comments. But the problem is she has a platform, a big platform.
Exactly. And so she is really spreading the ignorance and subsequently supporting the genocide that's happening in Tigray. And so I want to just give way to those who are Eritrean, and you are calling it out. You are calling it out in spite of your heritage. I just want to applaud you for those of you who are brave enough, and in other parts of Ethiopia who are calling it out, who are willing to risk your lives to stand up and give voice to the truth of what's really happening with this genocide. I just saw another comment I was going to read, something about, I missed it. If you could put that last comment back up there, please. But in the meantime, you have given so many examples of how and why this qualifies as a genocide. It's the rape of the women. It is the killing of the boys. It is the disappearance of 1 million folks that nobody can account for. And this says, Haben. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Haben. Yes, she has had multiple opportunities to deny what's happening and justify Tigray's genocide, but obviously she has chosen not to. And then I wonder too, if there's money involved. When she was over there and they treated her with such royalty, if they paid her, and how much they're paying her because they know the platform that she has. And that just gives them an even larger platform to continue the psychological conditioning and to keep their message being what it is, the narrative being what it is, in that the Tigrayans are the bad ones.
So that they deserve it. I really appreciate Linda, because she is like really shocked about what she's hearing. And that should be the reaction. That should be a reaction. You should be appalled. You should be upset. You should be drawn to action. I mean, it really is that insane and bewildering that a government could do that to its own people. I mean, I see Tsagga too, and she's commenting here, and her family's impacted as well. I mean, it's just, when all you're asking for is to be left alone, when all you're asking for is to be able to live, the political stuff, that can be worked out. You can talk about whatever those political issues and questions are about a centralized government or decentralized government or whatever. That's fine. Those are fine and fair conversations to have. But you don't get there by exterminating a whole group of people. And that's exactly what's happening right now. And what will happen if something doesn't happen now, like now. People can't wait.
And I want to real quickly, money. Let's talk about donations, because I know that there's been a lot of controversial messages about where the money is going. Is the money really getting to where it should be to support the people that need it? What is your take on what the best way to contribute to actually make a difference? I know that I saw a comment up there earlier about really putting the pressure on your government officials, our local government officials, so that the United States will get the message. And if the people are putting the pressure on the leadership, eventually the leadership is really going to have to take a powerful stance on purpose, even bigger than what they're doing right now. As much as we can appreciate the baby steps that the Biden administration has taken, we need more, and we need more now. So what would you say about the financial contributions, and should people be sending money, and what is the area or the entity that you feel could best be trusted with any financial donations?
Good, really, really good questions. And one thing about contacting representatives, I've been really disappointed by the response here in Colorado. You have Jason Crow, who was elected essentially by Tigrayans because there was division in the community, who won't make a strong statement against the genocide. He puts these lukewarm statements out saying things like, all sides should calm down. Not exactly in those words, but things like that. And you're like, all sides? What are all sides to rape? What is the other side to rape? There's no other side. What's the other side to starvation? But they're afraid because they don't want to, anger genocide deniers, and who may come out against him in the next election or something. And I'm like, what happened to just standing on principle, regardless of where it takes you? There are few people who are willing to do that. And so, Bennett's office has been receptive, but we're still waiting for strong responses. Hickenlooper's office recently engaged. And so, we're counting on people in Vermont, and people in faraway, East Coast, West Coast to do these things, because people here in Colorado are just tepid. They're giving these tepid responses.
So maybe it's up to us then to demand some kind of town meeting with these officials, with these government officials, especially Jason Crow, since you've made it clear where a large percentage of his votes came from, that community and the African-American community need to partner and come together and demand a meeting and his attention, and him to give us an explanation as to why he's not doing more. And we need to demand that he, Hickenlooper, and others do more, because they owe us that. They owe the Tigray that. We are out of time. We're a little bit over, but I want to thank you all for tuning in and giving your time to this message. Don't let this message die out now that this show is over tonight. Find out how you can get involved. Millete, would you put your call out your email or a way to contact you, and those viewers who are working with her in this movement, or maybe you can put contact information in the chat so that people who want to be involved and want to be a part of making a change, making an indent, because this is not something that can be fixed quickly. This is going to take decades just to heal from all of the trauma. So please put some contact information in the chat so that people can follow up who want to be a part of making a difference. Again, you have been watching R&R with Topazz. This evening show was dedicated to the genocide in Tigray, which is happening now. It's real. It's not a myth. It's not a lie. It's not something that's been made up for any kind of attention, but millions of people are being murdered either through starvation, through torture, rape. It is happening now. There are millions of people who have disappeared between the starvation, the rape, and just the trauma of everything that is happening right now in this country is devastating. And we need to support and help our sisters, our babies, the elderly. We need to be in position to help those that are vulnerable. Otherwise, what are we here for? And this is not, maybe you'll never step foot in that country, but it is about being truly a sister's keeper. That is what this is about. We are our sister's keeper. Thank you so much.
Can I say one thing?
Yes.
Just one last word. I wanted to say about donations. There are all these aid agencies, but the problem is that Eritreans are blocking aid, so it's not getting to the people. So if you want to donate, there are two places that I recommend. If you go to that Tigray Action Committee, you can donate there. Another one is HPN4, the number 4, Tigray.org. And that's a 501c3. And what I love about them is they're figuring out workarounds around the government to get help directly to women on the ground. So hpn4tigray.org, there it is. So please, those are the two that I highly, highly recommend because it's reaching the people on the ground. The other thing is we have national protests coming up in Denver on this weekend, on Friday and Saturday, June 11th and June 12th. And we would love to see more non-Tigrayans there. We would love to see more Americans there. So
where should people meet up for this and what time?
If you go to my Facebook page, so Millete Birhanemaskel, and I'll put it in the chat, then you can see more, you can get more details. There's a car caravan on Saturday and an actual walking protest on Friday. And then on Saturday, what's interesting is at 3 p.m. we'll be meeting at Aksum Park, because there's a 25-year sister city relationship between Denver and Aksum. And don't forget, there was that big massacre in Aksum. So we're going to commemorate those two things, the good and the bad, related to Aksum on Saturday afternoon. So go to my Facebook page, you'll get a lot more information and addresses and that kind of thing.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll be there. I know that there will probably be other representation from CTN Media that will be present. We are committed to supporting this movement and making the imprint that we can with regard to this cause. Protect Black women everywhere, globally. That's what this is about. All right. So thank you again for tuning in. Release and Rediscover. This has been a platform this evening dedicated to the real life genocide in Tigray. Act now to stop Tigray genocide, weaponized rape, weaponized mass starvation in hashtag Tigray, hashtag Ethiopian army, hashtag Eritrean army, hashtag the Ada militia, with the help of the Emirates, pronounce that for me.
The Emirates drone. So he's calling out the different groups that are all attacking Tigray right now. And those are the different groups. But if you just go hashtag Tigray genocide, you will learn so much. So thank you, Linda. You said you're going to do your research. Thank you so much. We need you.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Thank you again for tuning in this evening. And we will probably be visiting this topic again In our next season of R&R, we'll be inviting our guests back and maybe some other guests that can come along with you as we continue to explore this topic, because again, it's not going to die because this show ends or because there's a blackout in Tigray or because our government isn't stepping up. Guess what? It's up to the people. It's up to the people to do what's necessary to be done. All right. Peace out, everybody. Be safe.
Thank you for sharing your platform, Topazz. Thank you so much.
Oh, you are so welcome. I appreciate you. And one last thing that we didn't say, let me get this in real quick, just to let you know the level. I mentioned that class doesn't matter. The Pope, the only Black Pope. Can you just speak to that real quick?
Yes, I can. Yes, I can. So I told you about the spirituality of the country. You know, Christianity arguably started in Ethiopia, and the Black Pope, Abune Matias, has been put on house arrest because he spoke out against the genocide. He's an ethnic Tigrayan. He lives in the capital city of Addis Ababa, and they kept censoring him. They wouldn't let him speak on what was happening. And he was the first to call it a genocide, actually. And when he did, and his message was smuggled out. There was a group of Americans who were in Tigray doing healing work, because if you think about the trauma that people are undergoing right now, and so one of them was able to connect with the Pope in the capital city of Addis Ababa, recorded his message on a cell phone, and that's how we got his message. And he's now on house arrest.
Wow, wow, wow. So you see how serious this is and why we have related it to even at the level of spiritual warfare. So it's going to require some serious work to shut this down. And it is a process. We need you. We need every single one of you. Again, thank you for tuning in tonight. Thank you for supporting this cause. Good night, everybody. Peace and blessings. Stay safe.
Thank you.